Ibn Battuta went nearly 5 times as far, and he did it with no fortune, no trade, and nothing to sell. He set out in 1325, a 21-year-old law student leaving Tangier for Mecca, expecting to be gone 18 months. He came home 29 years later. In between, he crossed almost the entire known world, down the coast of Africa, across Arabia and Persia, up into the steppe of the Golden Horde, through Afghanistan to India, onto the Maldives, Ceylon, Bengal, by his own account, all the way to China, and at the very end, south over the Sahara to Mali. And you have probably never heard his name. Here's the part the legend never explains. He was no merchant, no conqueror, no heir to a fortune, just a student with a little road money and no plan beyond Mecca. So how does a man with no income spend 30 years crossing the world and come home not in debt, but at times fabulously rich? The romance says wanderlust. We followed the receipts. And the receipts say something sharper. Ibn Battuta wasn't paying to see the world. The world was paying him. This is the traveler. Today, the man who traveled for a living. To understand how Ibn Battuta could do what he did, you have to stop picturing his journey the way we picture travel today, as a series of foreign countries, each with its own language, its own border, its own suspicion of the stranger. Because that is not the world he moved through. By the 14th century, there existed something historians call the Dar al-Islam, literally the House of Islam. It was not one empire. It had dozens of rulers who frequently went to war with each other. But it was, in a real and practical sense, a single connected civilization, stretching from the Atlantic coast of Morocco to the islands of Southeast Asia. And across that entire span, an educated Muslim shared 3 things with the people he met: the same faith, the same sacred language, Arabic, and, crucially, the same body of law. Think about what that means for a traveler. From Spain to India, the call to prayer was the same. The scholarship was in a language he could read. The legal system a judge applied in Damascus was recognizably the one applied in Delhi. A man who knew the Quran and the law was not a foreigner in any of these places. He was a colleague. And running through this whole connected world was the great annual current that set everything in motion, the Hajj. Every year, tens of thousands of people from every corner of the Dar al-Islam converged on Mecca and then dispersed again. A vast, predictable, civilization-wide circulatory system of human beings on the move. The roads were built for it. The institutions were built for it. And that is the detail that quietly explains everything. All along these routes stood religious lodges, the Zawiya, the Madrasa, the Pilgrim Hostel, many of them funded by a Muslim institution called the Waqf, a charitable endowment, a kind of permanent trust, established by the pious to feed and shelter travelers, scholars, and the poor, for free, in perpetuity. So when Ibn Battuta arrived, exhausted, in a city he had never seen, he did not need a fortune. He needed a reputation. A pious traveler, and especially a scholar, could expect a bed, a meal, and an audience. The infrastructure of charity carried him from one end of the world to the other. He wasn't crossing 30 hostile frontiers. He was moving through one enormous house, and the house had been built, deliberately, to take men like him in. A free bed gets you a night, and a night is all it gets you. It does not get you 30 years, or horses, or slaves, or the means to simply turn around at the edge of China and start again. For that, Ibn Battuta needed an income. And here is the elegant, almost invisible engine of his entire life. Ibn Battuta was a qadi, a judge trained in Islamic law, specifically the Maliki school, the legal tradition of the Muslim West. That sounds modest. It was, in the 14th century, something close to a winning lottery ticket. Consider the supply and demand. Across the rapidly expanding edges of the Muslim world, in newly converted kingdoms in India, in the Maldives, in West Africa, in the trading cities of the Indian Ocean, rulers wanted to govern as proper Islamic states. That required men who actually knew the sacred law, who could serve as judges, lead prayers, settle inheritance, lend a court the stamp of legitimacy. and in those frontier places, such men were desperately scarce. Meanwhile, here comes a genuine article. An Arabic-speaking scholar, trained in the old heartland of Islamic learning, who has personally made the pilgrimage to Mecca, not once but repeatedly, and who has studied with famous teachers in Damascus and Cairo. To a sultan on the far edge of the Islamic world, a man like that was not a drifter asking for charity. He was an asset. A foreign scholar at your court was prestige. He was a connection to Mecca, to the center, to the real thing. He made your rule look legitimate. So they paid for him. Not in wages exactly, in gifts. This is the part that looks strange to modern eyes, so look closely, because it is the whole system. In this world, a ruler's generosity was his power. A great sultan demonstrated his greatness by overwhelming worthy men with presents, gold, robes of honor, horses, mounts, servants, slaves, grants of land and revenue. To give lavishly was to advertise that you could. And a respected cadi who arrived at your court was exactly the kind of worthy man you were expected to shower. Ibn Battuta understood this perfectly. He would arrive, he would be honored, he would be given gifts that funded the next leg, and the next ruler, not to be outdone by the last, would give more. His income was not a salary, it was his status, converted into supplies, one court at a time. He was not a tourist spending a fortune to see the world. He was a credential, and the credential paid its own way. Tughlaq is one of the most extraordinary figures Ibn Battuta ever met, and the most dangerous. He was staggeringly generous, a ruler who handed out wealth on a scale that astonished even a man who had spent his life collecting gifts. He was also brilliant, unpredictable, and capable of appalling cruelty. A sultan who might load you with gold one morning and execute a courtier the next. Ibn Battuta served him, warily, for years, and was made the Qadi of Delhi with a land grant that came with an enormous annual income. But the single most revealing story he tells about Delhi is not about a judgment he handed down. It is about a transaction. Tughlaq was famous for a particular habit. He returned gifts at a far higher value than he received them. Give the sultan something fine, and he would give you back something finer, many times over. To anyone paying attention, that is not generosity. That is an exploitable rule. So Ibn Battuta exploited it. He borrowed, heavily, to assemble a magnificent offering for the sultan: horses, camels, goods worthy of a king. He went into serious debt to do it. And he presented this dazzling gift to Tughlaq knowing, with near certainty, that the return gift would be worth far more than the loan he had taken out to buy it. The sultan, true to form, rewarded him lavishly. And then, by a custom of that court, Ibn Battuta was able to have the sultan settle the very debts he had run up buying the gift in the first place. Sit with the mechanics of that. He borrowed money to buy presents, gave the presents away, received greater presents in return, and then had someone else pay off the original loan. He arbitraged a king's vanity. The patronage economy wasn't just feeding him a meal at a roadside lodge anymore. In the right court, with the right credential and the right nerve, it was a money machine. This is the receipt that demolishes the romance. The greatest traveler in history was, among other things, an exceptionally shrewd operator inside a financial system most of us have never been taught to see. He didn't wander into wealth. He worked it. Now, because this is the traveler, and we owe you the whole ledger, we have to turn the audit on the man himself. Because Ibn Battuta's account has a problem. The same problem, strangely, that haunts Marco Polo. It starts with a catastrophe. In 1341, Tughlaq chose Ibn Battuta for the grandest assignment of his life, ambassador to the Emperor of China, carrying a gift so lavish it tells you everything about the age. 200 slaves, dancers and singers, 100 horses, gold, brocade, swords, treasures heaped on treasures. The whole journey is the patronage economy scaled up to international diplomacy. It went catastrophically wrong. On the way to the coast, his party was attacked. Ibn Battuta was robbed of nearly everything, stripped, by his own account, down to his clothes. And then, near the port of Calicut on the Indian coast, the ships carrying the emperor's gift were wrecked in a storm. The treasure was lost. The mission was destroyed before it left India. And because Tughlaq did not forgive failure, Ibn Battuta couldn't even go back to Delhi. He fled to the Maldives, where, naturally, he became a Qadi again, married into the ruling elite, and within months was so entangled in the island's politics that he had to leave once more. But here's the audit. From this point eastward, Bengal, Southeast Asia, and above all China, Ibn Battuta's account changes character. The earlier sections, on the lands he clearly knew, are astonishingly rich. Specific names, specific people, vivid scenes, details a man could only have from being there. The eastern sections go thin. The itinerary turns vague and sometimes impossible. The personal detail dries up. And scholars have found passages that appear to be lifted, almost word for word, from earlier writers. Serious historians, Hamilton Gibb, Ross Dunn, among others, have concluded that it is extremely unlikely Ibn Battuta visited everything he claimed, and some doubt he reached China at all, or anywhere much east of Ceylon. The China chapters may rest heavily on hearsay and on books written by other men. He describes Chinese porcelain confidently as being made out of charcoal. It is not the description of a man who watched it being made. None of that connects to what comes next. And there is one more thing the romance leaves out. Ibn Battuta did not write the Rihla. Like Marco Polo before him, he dictated it, at the end of his life, at a royal court in Morocco, to a professional man of letters named Ibn Juzai, who polished the prose, added poetry, and, it turns out, stitched in borrowed passages from an earlier traveler, Ibn Jubair, to describe certain holy cities. The most famous travel book of the Muslim world is, like the most famous travel book of Christendom, a collaboration between a traveler and a writer, and not every line of it can be trusted. So we hold both things at once. The core, the vast Islamic world Ibn Battuta moved through for decades, is detailed, checkable, and overwhelmingly real. The edges, the Far East, the parts that sound most like wonders, are exactly where the receipts run out. He was the greatest traveler of his age. He was also, sometimes, a teller of other men's tales. None of that connects to what comes next. And then, in the early 1350s, Ibn Battuta finally stopped. There had been one last journey first, across the Sahara to the Empire of Mali, the gold kingdom of Mansa Musa, a generation after Musa's own famous pilgrimage. Then he returned to Morocco. The Sultan of the day, the Marinid ruler Abu Inan, commissioned the scholar Ibn Juzai to take down his story. And then Ibn Battuta did the most ordinary thing of all. He disappeared. He took, most likely, a judgeship somewhere in Morocco, and he died around 1368 in something close to obscurity. The Rihla, that gift to those who contemplate the wonders of cities, circulated quietly in the libraries of the Muslim West and was, for the most part, forgotten by the wider world, for nearly 500 years. Now compare that to Marco Polo. Polo traveled barely a fifth as far. His own neighbors nicknamed his book The Million Lies. And yet Marco Polo became, and remains, the most famous traveler in human history, a household name on a planet that has never heard of the man who traveled nearly 5 times as far. Why? The same reason that explains everything else in this story: systems. Marco Polo's book was born into the right system at the right moment. It hit a Europe that was inventing the printing press and aching with hunger for the riches of the East, a Europe that would soon send men west across the Atlantic chasing exactly the Asia Polo described. His book was fuel for an age of expansion, and that age copied it, printed it, argued about it, and carried it for centuries. Ibn Battuta's book was born into a system that was, by then, no longer expanding outward in the same way. It stayed in Arabic, in the Maghreb, treasured by a few. It did not get a printing press and a continent of obsessive readers. And so the greatest traveler of the medieval world sat on a shelf, until the 19th century, when European scholars, of all people, finally found the manuscripts, translated them, and realized with some astonishment what they were holding: the record of a journey that put Marco Polo to shame. He out-traveled the most famous traveler in history by a factor of nearly 5, and it bought him almost nothing, because fame, like funding, runs on a system. And this time, he wasn't plugged in. None of that connects to what comes next. So here is the reckoning, and it does not look much like the story we are usually told. Ibn Battuta was not a lone romantic wandering the earth on curiosity and courage. He was something more interesting and more human, a highly trained professional who understood, better than almost anyone, the machinery of the world he lived in. He carried a credential the frontier was starving for. He moved through an infrastructure of charity built to receive him. He let the vanity of kings pay his way, and in Delhi he turned that vanity into an outright profit. For 30 years he cashed a civilization's respect for the learned and the pious, one court at a time. And we should be honest about the rest. He did not see quite everything he said he saw. His book was shaped by another man's pen and salted with other men's words. The farther east he claims to go, the thinner the proof. He was a great traveler and an unreliable narrator at the same time, which, if you think about it, is true of almost everyone who has ever told you the story of their own life. The legend asks how one man could be so curious, so brave, so free. The ledger asks a better question. What kind of world makes a journey like that possible? And the answer is a civilization that had built, without quite meaning to, an economy of movement, where a judge's diploma was a passport, a sultan's gift was a paycheck, and a charitable endowment 3,000 miles from home was a guaranteed bed for the night. Ibn Battuta didn't conquer that world. He read it, and he spent 30 years collecting on it. Tareekh ka Hisaab, history, audited. Hisaab abhi baki hai. The account isn't settled.